What happens when you design the perfect evidence-based behavior intervention plan and the client still just doesn't make progress?
Yeah, that is the ultimate nightmare scenario right there.
Right. You were sitting there, you're staring at the grass, and the trend line is just painfully flat. And, I mean, the immediate temptation is to rip up the entire plan.
Oh, absolutely.
You assume the intervention failed, and you start over from scratch. But before you do that, you need to check one critical thing.
Welcome to this deep dive, by the way. Today, we are mastering task list item H.6, which is procedural integrity.
It is such a crucial topic.
It really is. Our mission today is to give you the exact tools to make data-based decisions on this so you can become a top 1% clinician. But think of a behavior plan like a master chef's recipe.
Okay, I like that.
If the meal tastes terrible, you don't instantly blame the recipe itself. First, you walk into the kitchen and check if the sous chef accidentally swapped salt for sugar. Today, we are mastering that kitchen check.
The kitchen analogy really, well, it hits at the exact heart of the issue, right? Because we spend hours writing these technologically precise plans, and it becomes, honestly, a bit of an ego trap.
Oh, for sure.
We assume that because the plan looks flawless on paper, any failure must mean the behavioral principles themselves need adjusting. But clinically, procedural integrity, which, you'll often see referred to in the literature as treatment integrity.
Yeah, they get used interchangeably a lot.
Exactly. It is simply the extent to which the independent variable is implemented exactly as planned.
So basically, are they actually doing the thing we wrote down?
Precisely. If your treatment is not being applied exactly as you wrote it, then you have zero experimental control.
Wow, zero.
None. You cannot definitively say whether the intervention is working or failing because, well, the intervention you designed isn't actually happening.
So a lack of treatment integrity basically becomes the absolute #1 suspect for a lack of client progress.
Yes. Always check the integrity first. And I imagine this plays out constantly in homes and clinics because, let's be real, the reality on the ground is just inherently messy. You write a beautiful plan, hand it to a technician, but then, life happens.
It does. And this introduces a highly pervasive phenomenon known as treatment drift.
Treatment drift. Okay, break that down for us.
So this doesn't usually happen all at once. It's not a sudden failure. It happens incrementally over time.
Like a slow fade.
Exactly. Let's say you have a technician working in a home environment. The parents are watching, the sibling is running around screaming, and the technician is trying to run this highly specific prompting hierarchy.
Right, which takes a lot of focus.
Right. And over a few weeks, that technician might start dropping a specific prompt because they feel like the client is, getting it.
Yeah, or maybe they start delivering reinforcement just a couple of seconds too late because they are managing a distraction from the sibling.
Yes. And so the procedure slowly drifts away from the written document.
Which means if you aren't constantly checking the compass, you could be miles off course without even realizing it.
And that brings us directly into the territory of Ethics Code 2.17 regarding collecting and using data.
Because you need hard data to see the drift.
Exactly. This code requires us to actively ensure the appropriate selection and correct implementation of data collection procedures. To effectively evaluate integrity, your measurement of the staff's performance, it has to possess 3 essential dimensions.
Okay, what are those?
First, accuracy, meaning your data represents the true value of what actually occurred in the session. Second is validity, which means you are measuring the relevant dimension of the right behavior.
Right behavior, got it.
And third is reliability, which is your measurement's consistency over time. If your measurement lacks any of these 3, your procedural integrity data is essentially a mirage.
Okay, let's ground this in a real applied ABA example so we can see what this looks like on the floor.
Let's do it.
Imagine a clinical setup where we are using a DRO, a differential reinforcement of other behavior. For anyone needing a quick refresher, that's where we deliver a reinforcer when the client does literally anything other than the target problem behavior for a specific amount of time.
Right. A very common procedure.
Yeah. So let's say we have this DRO on a 10-minute schedule during morning reading. The target steps for the technician are highly operationalized. They must verbally prompt the client at the start, keep the physical desk clear of absolutely everything except the current reading material, and then deliver the reinforcer exactly at the 10-minute mark.
Assuming no target behavior occurs, of course.
Right, exactly. Assuming zero target behavior. So how do we measure that?
To measure the procedural integrity of that exact scenario as the supervising BCBA, you have to use a formal objective checklist.
Like a step-by-step task analysis for the staff.
Precisely. You conduct direct monitoring where you observe the session and score the staff members' adherence to those specific steps. Did they provide the verbal prompt? Check.
Was the desk completely clear? Check. Was the reinforcer delivered immediately at the 10-minute interval? Check. You calculate the percentage of steps implemented correctly, and that resulting percentage, well, that is your procedural integrity score.
But let's introduce the human element here, because this is where the theory clashes with reality.
It always does.
Let's look at a scenario based on Case 2.17 from the ethics workbook sources. You have a technician running a 1-hour discrete trial training session in a highly hectic clinic.
We've all been there.
The transition times are super tight.
Okay.
The supervisor tells the technician to just, estimate the data for the last 15 minutes of the session to save time and get the client to the next area.
Oh, boy.
Now, I'm going to push back on the rigid clinical view for a second and advocate for the technician here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Look, I get the ethics code, but let's be real. If I'm a technician, I've been with this kid for 5 hours, I am exhausted.
I know his behavioral patterns intimately, and my supervisor's literally screaming at me to transition to the gym right now. If I quickly estimate the last 15 minutes of trials, am I really destroying the science, or am I just surviving my shift and making a practical clinic decision?
It is entirely understandable why a burnt-out technician would feel that way. I mean, the empathy is there, but the psychological reality of human memory completely destroys the science in that scenario.
Completely destroys it.
Absolutely. Estimating data is a massive ethics violation because it obliterates both validity and accuracy. Human memory is remarkably flawed, especially under stress or fatigue.
Right. You only remember the big stuff.
Exactly. If a technician estimates the last 15 minutes of data, they are introducing severe observer bias. They are highly likely to remember the extreme moments, the successful independent trials, or the major problem behaviors.
And completely forgetting the mundane, prompted trials in between.
Yes.
So they end up just checking boxes that reflect their general vibe of how the session went rather than what actually happened.
That's a great way to put it. A vibe check is not data. And the moment that happens, the data transitions from being an objective measurement to being fabricated documentation.
Wow. Fabricated. That's a heavy word.
It is. But Code 6.11 and 2.17 are built around this exact danger. If you, as the supervising clinician, start making treatment decisions like thinning a schedule of reinforcement or determining a skill is mastered based on that estimated vibe-based data, your clinical decisions are worse than useless.
Because you're adjusting a medical intervention based on a fantasy.
You could be actively harming the client's progress.
That is a harsh but really necessary reality check. The graph basically becomes a work of fiction.
Exactly.
And once you start looking for these procedural errors, it becomes obvious how easily a well-meaning clinic can fall into some major traps. Let's pull apart a few of these.
Let's do it.
I want to start with trap number 1, which is the false security trap. Confusing inter-observer agreement, or IOA, with accuracy. You hear this in clinics all the time. A supervisor will say, oh, our IOA is at 95%, so we know our data is perfectly accurate.
Oh, I cringe when I hear that. That is one of the most common and dangerous misunderstandings of measurement quality in our entire field.
Okay.
Yes. IOA is simply the degree to which 2 or more independent observers report the same observed values after measuring the same events.
So they just agree on what they saw.
Right. High OA increases the believability of the data. It makes us confident that the observers are well trained on the measurement system, but it does not in any way prove that the data is accurate or valid.
Okay, break the mechanics of that down for us, because
Right.
I think people get stuck on that. How is it possible for 2 highly trained professionals to agree nearly 100% on what they saw and still be totally wrong?
Okay, consider the classic environmental observation example. You want to record how often a child picks his nose during a 30-minute circle time.
Okay, pretty straightforward behavior.
Right. So you and a secondary observer sit quietly on the left side of the room. Over the half hour, you both record exactly 8 occurrences of the child putting his finger to his nose.
Got it.
You compare your data sheets. Your IOA is 100%. The data is highly reliable across observers, and it feels highly believable.
Right. You both saw it 8 times.
But the next day, you move your chair to the right side of the room. From this new angle, you realize the child isn't picking his nose at all.
Wait, What is he doing?
He has a small scab on his cheek right next to his nostril, and he is just picking at that. From the left side of the room, the angle completely obscured the scab.
Oh, wow. So you had a perfectly harmonious, 100% agreed upon measurement of a total illusion.
You did. The data completely lacked validity because you weren't actually measuring the relevant behavior you intended to measure, even though your agreement was flawless.
That is mind-blowing.
We aim for an IOA of 80% agreement across 20 to 30% of sessions. But we must never let that believability trick us into assuming we have true accuracy or treatment integrity.
That completely shifts how you have to look at data collection. Which brings us to the second major trap, punishing staff for low integrity scores.
Right.
Let's say you do your formal monitoring, you run your objective checklist on that morning reading DRO we talked about, and the technician's procedural integrity score comes back at a disastrous 30%.
A painful moment for any supervisor.
The knee-jerk reaction for a stressed supervisor is often punitive. They want to issue a formal write-up or, pull the technician off the case entirely.
And the supervisory literature explicitly warns against that exact instinct. Formal disciplinary action should be the absolute last resort.
The last resort.
Yes. It should be reserved almost exclusively for intentional malicious behavior, like the data fabrication we discussed earlier. If a well-meaning staff member has a 30% integrity score, the clinician's immediate job is to assess the environment to figure out why the failure occurred.
And this is where we have to really look in the mirror as clinicians. Because the failure might be the plan itself.
Oh, absolutely.
The BCBA might have written this 20-page masterpiece behavior plan that requires the technician to juggle like 3 different timers, a complex token board economy, a dense prompting hierarchy, and a crisis protocol, all at the exact same time.
Yes, and we sometimes expect technicians to operate like highly calibrated robots.
Exactly.
But that cognitive load is exactly why complex plans fail. The foundational text reminds us that, all things being equal, a simple and brief treatment will be applied much more accurately than a complex one.
Right. Keep it simple.
You have to look at the clinical environment you designed. Have you actually utilized behavioral skills training, or BST?
Did you just hand them a binder and ask them to read it?
Right. Or did you physically model the procedure for them? Did you role-play the scenarios and provide immediate constructive performance feedback? If a supervisor hasn't executed those evidence-based training steps, it is highly unethical to punish the technician.
Wow.
The failure is a supervisory deficit, not a technician deficit.
It's the difference between just managing a team and actually leading one.
Well said.
And that transitions perfectly into the third trap,
Yeah.
relying on self-reporting. Let's say a clinical director is swamped with administrative work. They don't have time to do direct observation, so they just send out an end-of-week survey.
I see this a lot.
Yeah. Hey, team, on a scale of 1 to 5, how well do you feel you implemented the DRO plan this week?
The applied sources, particularly the mock exam materials, highlight this as the absolute least effective method to measure procedural integrity.
Because people just lie.
Well, not even maliciously. Self-reporting relies on human self-assessment, which is just notoriously riddled with bias. We tend to judge ourselves based on our intentions rather than our actual actions.
Oh, that makes sense. Like, I meant to run the DRO perfectly.
Exactly. A staff member might genuinely, honestly believe they are implementing a plan flawlessly, even when they are fundamentally drifting from the core procedures. You cannot rely on a feeling or a survey. You must use direct observation with objective checklists.
Okay, so we have a firm grip on the real world, messy concepts, the psychology of drift, and the traps we fall into. Let's take all of that and translate it into the sterile environment of the Pearson VUE Testing Center.
Yes, let's switch gears.
Let's decode the exam strategy for task list item H.6. When you are sitting in that chair staring at the screen, you need to know the conditional logic the exam writers are using.
The exam essentially tests your ability to prioritize fundamental behavioral principles over emotional reactions. Let's break down the conditional logic.
Okay, strategy 1.
If you see a question asking for the best way to ensure high treatment integrity, you look for the answer that focuses on keeping the intervention simple. The exam heavily favors the philosophy that simple plans are executed accurately. If you are debating between an option that says add more comprehensive contingencies and an option that says simplify the instructions to implementers, simplify is your winning answer.
That makes perfect sense given the cognitive load issue we just talked about.
Yeah.
Okay, strategy 2. What if the scenario paints a picture where treatment integrity has already fallen below acceptable levels and it's asking what the BCBA should do next?
In that case, you select the option that focuses on analyzing the root reasons for the low integrity and intervening on those specific deficits.
So no write-ups.
Exactly. You aggressively avoid any answer that suggests rewriting the entire plan immediately or utilizing punitive staff discipline. You want the option that utilizes behavioral skills, training modeling, practice, and feedback to build the staff's competency back up.
Love that.
Yeah.
And strategy 3. The severe scenario. You see a test question where a supervisor realizes data is actively being falsified, or an RBT is estimating data at the end of the day to save time.
For data falsification, you choose the immediate, severe administrative response. This is the exception to the non-punitive rule.
Because it's not a skill deficit.
Right. Falsifying data is grounds for immediate dismissal because it strikes at the core of the science. It violates multiple ethics codes regarding the accuracy of data. The exam logic does not tolerate leniency when it comes to fraudulent documentation because the integrity of the entire behavioral field relies on the truthfulness of our measurement.
Keep the plan simple, train to the specific deficit, and hold a zero-tolerance policy for fake data. That is elite, high-level exam logic.
It really is.
Now, I want to take everything we've discussed and level up one more time. I want to dive into a clinical power insight.
Okay.
How do top-tier, top 1% BCBAs and clinical directors prevent these procedural integrity issues from happening in the first place, rather than just running around constantly putting out fires?
It requires a massive paradigm shift regarding evidence-based supervision. We have to link this task list item-making data-based decisions on procedural integrity directly to Section I-7 and Ethics Code 4.04.
Which covers accountability in supervision.
Yes. The ultimate clinical insight is this. If a technician fails to implement a plan correctly, the supervising BCBA is held accountable. You are the architect of that clinical environment.
You can't just point at the sous chef and say it's their fault. The meal is ruined when you own the restaurant.
Precisely the point. The elite standard is building a proactive system. You don't just write a beautiful technological plan and walk away.
Right.
You utilize performance-based and competency-based training. This means the staff member must actively demonstrate the skill in a role play or live setting until they reach mastery criteria before they are left alone.
So you know they can actually do it.
Exactly. And then the supervision doesn't stop. You conduct objective, consistent, formal monitoring.
But the culture of that monitoring really matters, right? It can't just be a manager walking around with a clipboard trying to play gotcha and catch people making mistakes.
And this is perhaps the most crucial insight from the supervisory literature. The concept of stand-up supervision.
Stand-up supervision, what does that mean?
You don't monitor just to catch the errors. You monitor so you have the hard, objective data required to stand up for your staff when they are doing excellent work under difficult circumstances.
I love the psychology of that. Walk us through how stand-up supervision actually plays out in a clinic.
Okay, imagine a scenario where a clinic director or a school principal walks down the hallway, they look into a room and see a technician seemingly ignoring a client who is engaging in intense, loud screaming.
Okay, so to an outsider, that looks terrible.
Right. To the untrained eye of the executive, it looks like the technician is neglecting their job, just standing there doing absolutely nothing. The executive wants to step in and reprimand the staff member. But you, the supervising clinician, have been conducting procedural integrity monitoring. You know the client's behavior plan calls for the planned ignoring of attention-maintained screaming.
Oh, I see where this is going. Because
you have the data, you can step in front of that executive and say, actually, this technician is implementing the extinction procedure with 100% integrity in a highly stressful moment. You literally stand up for them in the boardroom or the hallway.
The emotional impact that must have on a technician is massive. When you use data to protect and support your staff, you completely revolutionize the culture of supervision.
Absolutely.
They won't fear your clipboard. They will actively welcome your observation because they know you are gathering evidence to have their back.
And when you create an environment where staff feel supported, protected, and adequately trained, your procedural integrity naturally stabilizes. The anxiety drops, the cognitive load is managed, the intervention is applied consistently, and ultimately, the client achieves their clinical outcomes.
That is the true overarching function of mastering this topic. What an incredible deep dive today. We have covered a massive amount of ground.
We really did.
We move from the core definition of procedural integrity and the insidious nature of treatment drift to walking through a real-world DRO checklist. We navigated the exhaustion of the technician, avoided the dangerous illusion of the IOA trap, and mapped out the exact conditional logic that will get you a passing score on the exam.
Plus that advanced insight on stand-up supervision.
Yes, that is a framework you can use to change how you practice today. If this helped you, follow behavioral intelligence, share this episode with another RBT or BCBA who's studying, and leave a comment or review. That's how we grow and how I keep creating high-level content for you. At Amethyst Therapy Services, Inc., we build clinicians, not just test passers. At www.amethysttherapyservices.com. info@amethysttherapyservices.com. Before you go, I want to leave you with one final scenario to really chew on as you head into your next session. Imagine you are running an observation and your IOA, your inter-observer agreement, is a perfect, flawless 100%. Everyone in the room agrees exactly on what they're seeing.
Okay.
But your procedural integrity data sits at a dismal 20%. What is your data actually telling you in that moment? Think about it. You might be perfectly, flawlessly, and harmoniously measuring the exact wrong intervention. See you on the next deep dive.